You're listening to WEEU Radio, broadcasting at 830 on the AM dial from Reading, Pennsylvania. I'm Jingle Schnutz, the WEEU Holiday Festival of Sound Elf. Have a great time with you during this holiday season. And now, more of our Holiday Festival of Sound.
Welcome to WEEU's Holiday Festival of Sound. I'm producer and one of the show hosts, Dave Kline, from Reading Eagle Company and WEEU Radio. The next group up is called the Belle Tones. It's a female vocal group from Berks County. One of their members, Amy Shea, makes her home in New York City and appears in nationally televised programs. Let's hear them now with a holiday medley. Again, this is the Belle Tones.
Mr. Santa, bring me some toys. Bring Merry Christmas to all girls and boys. And every night I'll go to sleep singing and dream about the presents you'll be bringing. Santa, promise me please, give every reindeer a hug and a squeeze. I'll be good as good can be. Mr. Santa, don't forget me. Christmas, Christmas time is near. Time for toys and time for cheer. We've been good, but we can't last. Hurry, Christmas, hurry fast. Want a plane that moves the loop. Me, I want a hula hoop. We can hardly stand the wait. Please, Christmas, don't be late. We can hardly stand the wait. Please, Christmas, don't be late.
My name is Rich Conrad, an elementary band teacher in the Reading School District, and I want to thank Reading Musical Foundation for their support of our music program. RMF's Operation Replay program collects donated instruments from community members and connects those instruments to students in need. Our students absolutely light up with joy when they're given this opportunity. If you have an unused instrument collecting dust in your house, please consider donating it to Operation Replay. Your generosity can make a difference in the life of an aspiring young musician. Find more information at readingmusicalfoundation.org.
You know, a couple years ago, I got nostalgic for the good old days when I was a boy, and we'd be out playing in our sleds and carrying on until, all hours of the night. Back in those days, the burros used to plow the roads just to a height that the snow could turn to ice, and then they'd put horses up across the roads, wooden horses, so that no one could drive on the roads and ruin them for the sledding. And then we'd sled right after school, right after supper. We'd go out to the sledding hills, the Ruchies, and we'd spend the whole night sledding. We'd stay out there in the cold weather till all good sense was completely and utterly gone. We'd come home with frozen toes and fingers and blue jeans that were frozen stiff that had to actually be warmed up, maybe over the central coal duct of the house, that one coal duct. So you could take your pants off because they were frozen solid. Snow and ice, certainly part of the holiday season. Funny that when we're young, it's an opportunity to slide and play and sled and have fun. And as we grow older, it becomes a sort of the burden of shoveling and digging the car out and all that kind of stuff. I think it's best to stay young at heart, personally. However, there is great joy in nostalgia, especially this time of year. And so for lots of our listeners who were around at the dawn of radio, since this radio station is now more than 75 years old, I'd like to go back in time to some truly classic recordings. And while these weren't made by Berks Countyans, these recordings were made by people that Berks Countyans and truly the world loved at a time when radio was golden and theater of the mind ruled. So, in this particular order, I'm going to now play for you some recordings that we've really been fortunate to obtain for you. The first one was recorded in 1915 by the famous Irish tenor John McCormack, who lived from 1884 to 1945. The second one we'll hear is the famous Charles Lawton, who lived from 1899 to 1962, and it was recorded in 1943. The third recording we're going to hear is by the immortal Italian tenor Enrico Caruso. He lived from 1873 to 1921, and this recording was made in 1916, and will end the quartet of recordings from the good old days with the immortal Basil Rathbone, who lived from 1892 to 1967 and made the recording of The Night Before Christmas that you're going to hear back in 1939. But first we go back to the Irish tenor, Mr. John McCormick, from 1915. This is his rendition of Adestes Fidelis. Was John McCormick, the world-famous Irish tenor who lived from 1884 to 1945, with his recording of Adestes Fidelis, recorded in 1915 here on WEU's Holiday Festival Sound. We're getting nostalgic right now, going back to the golden age of radio. And next up, as I told you earlier, we're going to have a reading of the oldest Christmas story by a man who lived from 1899 to 1962. His name is Charles Lawton, and this recording was made in 1943.
And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed, with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. And there were in the same country shepherds, abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. And it came to pass, as the angels were gone away from them into heaven, the shepherds said one to another, Let us now go even unto Bethlehem, and see this thing which is come to pass, which the Lord hath made known unto us. And they came with haste, and found Mary and Joseph, and the babe lying in a manger. And when they had seen it, they made known abroad the saying which was told them concerning this child. And all they that heard it wondered at those things which were told them by the shepherds. But Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things that they had heard and seen, as it was told unto them.
You're listening to WEU's Holiday Festival of Sound. I'm glad you could be here with us. We're going back in time now to enjoy some nostalgic recordings of days gone by from the golden age of radio. You know, WEU radio is over 75 years old, and there are some folks in our listening audience who can remember when WEU went on the air. So for all of those folks, and for all of you who enjoy and remember and find pleasure in the nostalgic golden era of radio, we're going to continue on now with our quartet of recordings. The third recording now is by the immortal Enrico Caruso, who lived from 1873 to 1921. This recording of the Cantique de Noël was recorded in 1916.
c'est celui qui lui donna sauveur, peuple à genoux, attends ta délivrance, Noël, Noël, voici le Rédempteur. Noël, Noël, voici le Rédempteur a brisé toute entrave, la terre est libre et le ciel est souverain. Il voit sa frère, on ne te qu'en esclave, l'amour uni se cachait de le cœur. Il lui dira notre reconnaissance, c'est pour nous tous qu'il n'est qu'il souffre meurt. Peuple debout, chante ta délivrance, Noël, Noël, chantons le Rédempteur. Noël, Noël, chantons le
His voice was considered to be one of the all-time great tenor instruments, rivaling even the fabulous Pavarotti. That was the voice of Enrico Caruso, as it was recorded in 1916, all those many, many years ago. We're celebrating nostalgic moments of recorded history here on our WEEU Holiday Festival of Sound. And as I said earlier, while these particular recordings aren't of local folks, they are from an era that brings back lots of fond memories for many of us, both young and old. We hear those recordings, and there's that sense of nostalgia that is absolutely transcendent in the way it moves us back into time and celebrates an era that was, sort of the beginning of the golden age of radio, when creativity really started to flow from the airwaves, and people used to sit and watch their radios just as they went on to sit and watch their televisions. And now I suppose just as we sit and watch our computer screens as they stream the World Wide Web right before our very eyes. Our final recording of nostalgic memories from Christmases long ago is by the very famous Basil Rathbone. Now, many of you will remember Basil Rathbone for many parts, both on the silver screen and television and in the heyday, in the golden era of radio, on the radio. I remember Basil most profoundly in Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. In the black and white version, to me, is still better than the colorized version. Good old Basil Rathbone as the Sheriff of Nottingham going up against the ever-precocious Robin Hood, played by Errol Flynn. And at one point, Basil Rathbone strikes some lackey and calls him an eternal fool. I'll never forget it. You eternal fool. What a line it was. And then Basil went on to play in television the famous character Sherlock Holmes. And I hope that some of you do remember that. And gosh, folks, if you've never seen any of those things, if you're a younger person, please try to avail yourself of those great and historic moments. They're nostalgic, yes, but they're just outright great acting and great, great, great showmanship, as you're about to hear as Basil Rathbone narrates for the Golden Age of Radio in 1939 the Clement Clark Moore classic poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas."
Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh.
'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet them an obstacle, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled! His dimples, how merry! His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. He had a broad face, and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk and laying his finger aside of his nose and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim as he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
And there you have it, the great Basil Rathbone from 1939. He lived from 1892 till 1967, and that rounds out our quartet of recordings that we wanted to present to you during our Holiday Festival of Sound in honor of WEEU's 75-plus years of broadcasting history and in honor of you this Christmas season. We heard the great Irish tenor John McCormick, the unbelievably gifted Charles Laughton, the immortal Enrico Caruso, and finally, in the end, Basil Rathbone. This is WEEU's Dave Kline, and now I'm going to get out of here for a little while and let one of our other very capable announcers from WEEU take over the reins and drive the sleigh for the rest of the hour.
Merry Christmas! This is WEEU's Matt Gorney. You're listening to WEEU Radio's Holiday Festival of Sound, The holiday season would not be complete without the New Year's Eve holiday concert celebration by the Reading Symphony Orchestra. Now let's enjoy the RSO as they perform live renditions of a few New Year's Eve classics.
Recorded live at the Sovereign Performing Arts Center, that was our own Reading Symphony Orchestra. Now, here's another live recording made at the Scottish Rite Cathedral in West Reading of our own phenomenal Reading Pops Orchestra and the Nations of Praise Choir, rounding out this hour with the Alleluia Chorus. You are listening to WEEU Radio's Holiday Festival of Sound. The Alleluia Chorus, wasn't that fabulous? I'm WEEU's Dave Kline. Pleasure to be here with you during this Yuletide celebration. It's our gift to you, fellow members in our community. Right now in the background you hear our native son, Dave Cullen. You've heard segments of his music throughout our Holiday Festival of Sound because, you know what? He's a world-class guitarist, and he lives right here in Greater Reading and Berks County, and we're pretty darn proud of him. So let's now listen to his rendition of Silver Bells. That's Berks County's own Grammy Award-winning David Cullen on WEEU's Holiday Festival of Sound. Stick around, there's plenty more to go.
Reading Musical Foundation is Berks County's strongest advocate for music in our schools, and you can make it stronger. I'm Randy Shaler, CEO of Zezwitz Music. Zezwitz is proud to support Reading Musical Foundation's Operation Replay. RMF gathers musical instruments from donors like you around Berks County and turns them into new musical opportunities for young musicians who otherwise couldn't afford to play music. Join me and hundreds of others who invest in the future of music in Berks County with RMF, Reading Musical Foundation, for the love of music.
Ho, 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 ho.
Hello, this is Eastside Dave from the Mountain Folk Show. I'd like to share a very special poem with you right now as a sort of holiday gift. It's all about the gift, perhaps the greatest gift of all, your soul. I'm truly fond of this poem because my younger daughter wrote it many years ago, and let me share it with you now. My soul is a place where dreams are inspirational. My soul is funny, happy, kind, and loving. My soul enables me to be grateful for my wonderful kittens. My soul reminds me to live life to the fullest. My soul helps me to remember courtesy and respect. My soul is a place where I can be myself and not care what other people think. My soul is a guide for me in life. My soul understands other people's problems. My soul comforts people when they are upset. My soul allows me to become my dream. Merry Christmas.
This presentation of A Pickwick Christmas from Charles Dickens' Pickwick Papers is from a 1952 LP and starred Charles Lawton. It was one of the first LPs issued on the Decca label. In fact, the label on the LP looked exactly like those Decca 78s from the 1940s, glossy black with gold lettering. Decca decided to print Unbreakable on the label to distinguish it from those very breakable 78s. Still, it was a rigid plastic, very heavy, and I never tested whether or not it could be broken. In any case, here's A Pickwick Christmas with Charles Lawton, recorded in 1952, when I was 2 years old.
I have the highest pleasure in laying before you an account gathered from their letters of the investigations and observations of the 4 members of the Corresponding Society of the Pickwick Club on the occasion of their spending Christmas with their friend Mr. Wardle of the Manor Farm, Dingley Dell, in the county of Kenton. Brisk as bees did the 4 Pickwickians, Mr. Pickwick, Mr. Tupman, Mr. Winkle, and Mr. Snodgrass, assemble on the morning of the 22nd day of December. Christmas was close at hand in all his bluff and hearty honesty. Gay and merry was the time, and right gay and merry were at least 4 of the numerous hearts that were gladdened by its coming. And numerous indeed are the hearts to which Christmas brings a brief season of happiness and enjoyment. How many families whose members have been dispersed and scattered far and wide in the restless struggles of life are then reunited and meet once again. Happy, happy Christmas that can win us back to the delusions of our childish days, that can recall to the old man the pleasures of his youth, that can transport the sailor and the traveler thousands of miles away back to his own fireside and his quiet home. But we are so taken up and occupied with the good qualities of this Saint Christmas that we are keeping Mr. Pickwick and his friends waiting in the cold on the outside of the Muggleton coach, which they have just attained, well wrapped up in greatcoats, shawls, and comforters. The portmanteaus and carpet bags have been stowed away. The coachman mounts to the box. Sam Weller, Mr. Pickwick's manservant, jumps up behind. The Pickwickians pull their coats round their legs and their shawls over their noses. The helpers pull the horsecloths off. The coachman shouts a cheery, "All right," and away they go. They have rumbled through the streets and jolted over the stones, and at length reach the wide and open country. The wheels skim over the hard and frosty ground, And the horses, bursting into a canter at a smart crack of the whip, step along the road as if the load behind them, coach, passengers, portmanteaus, carpetbags and all, were but a feather at their heels. They have descended a gentle slope and enter upon a level as compact and dry as a solid block of marble 2 miles long. Another crack of the whip, and on they speed at a smart gallop, the horses tossing their heads and rattling the harness as if in exhilaration at the rapidity of the motion. The lively notes of the guard's key bugle sound lustily forth as the coach rattles through the ill-paved streets of a country town. Mr. Pickwick emerges from his coat collar and looks about him with great curiosity. Mr. Winkle, who sits at the extreme edge with one leg dangling in the air, is nearly precipitated into the street as the coach twists round the sharp corner by the cheesemonger's shop and turns into the marketplace, and before Mr. Snodgrass, who sits next to him, has had time to recover from his alarm, they pull up at the inn yard. So at 3 o'clock that afternoon, they all stood high and dry, safe and sound, hale and hearty, upon the steps of the Blue Lion, Muggleton. Mr. Pickwick was busily engaged in superintending the disinterment of the portmanteaus and carpet bags, when he felt himself gently pulled by the coat. Looking round, he discovered that the individual who resorted to this method of catching his attention was none other than Mr. Wardle's favorite page, hereinafter referred to in the pages of this unvarnished history by the distinguishing appellation of the Fat Boy. "Ha, ha," said Mr. Pickwick. "Ha, ha," said the Fat Boy. He was fatter than ever. "Well, you look rosy enough, my young friend," said Mr. Pickwick. "I've been asleep right in front of the tap-room fire," replied the Fat Boy, who had heated himself to the color of a new chimney-pot in the course of an hour's nap. "Master sent me over with a shay-cart to carry your luggage up to the house. He'd have sent some saddle horses, but he thought you'd rather walk, being a cold day." Yes, said Mr. Pickwick. "Yes, we would rather walk. Here, Sam." "Sir," said Mr. Weller, "help Mr. Wardle's servant to put the packages into the cart." Mr. Pickwick and his 3 friends struck into the footpath across the fields, leaving Mr. Weller and the Fat Boy confronted. Sam looked at the Fat Boy with great astonishment, but without saying a word, and began to stow the luggage rapidly away in the cart, while the Fat Boy stood quietly by and seemed to think it a very interesting sort of thing to see Mr. Weller working by himself. "There," said Sam, throwing in the last carpet bag. "There they are." "Yes," said the Fat Boy in a very satisfied tone. "There they are." "Well," said Sam, "you're a nice specimen of a prize boy, you are." "Thank ye," said the Fat Boy. "You ain't got nothing on your mind as makes you fret yourself, have you?" inquired Sam. "Not as I knows on," replied the Fat Boy. "Well," said Sam, "I'm glad to hear it. Do you ever drink anything?" "I likes eating better," replied the boy. "Ah," said Sam, "I should have supposed that. But what I mean is, should you like a drop of anything as 'ud warm you? But I suppose you never was cold with all them elastic fixtures, was you?" "Sometimes," replied the boy, "and I likes a drop of something when it's good." "Ah, you do you?" said Sam. "Come this way, then." The Blue Lion tap was soon gained, and the Fat Boy swallowed a glass of liquor, without so much as winking, a feat which considerably advanced him in Mr. Weller's good opinion. Mr. Weller having transacted a similar piece of business on his own account, they got into the cart. "Can you drive?" said the Fat Boy. "I should rather think so," replied Sam. "There, then," said the Fat Boy, putting the reins in his hand and pointing up a lane. "It's as straight as you can go. You can't miss it." With these words, the Fat Boy laid himself down amongst the portmanteaus and carpet bags and fell asleep instantaneously. Meanwhile, Mr. Pickwick and his friends, having walked their blood into active circulation, proceeded cheerfully on. The paths were hard. The grass was crisp and frosty. The air had a fine, dry, bracing coldness. It was the sort of afternoon that might induce a couple of elderly gentlemen in a lonely field to take off their greatcoats and play at leapfrog in pure lightness of heart and gaiety. And we firmly believe that had Mr. Tupman at that moment proffered a back, Mr. Pickwick would have accepted his offer with the utmost avidity. However, Mr. Tupman did not volunteer any such accommodation, and the friends walked on. But if they were cheerful and happy outside the house, what was the warmth and cordiality of their reception when they reached the farm. The servants grinned with pleasure at the sight of Mr. Pickwick, and Emma bestowed a half-demure, half-impudent look on Mr. Tupman, which was enough to make the statue of Bonaparte in the passage unfold his arms and clasp her within them. The old lady, Mr. Wardle's mother, was seated with customary state in the front parlor, but she was rather cross, and by consequence most particularly deaf. The old lady never went out herself, and like a great many other old ladies, she was apt to consider it an act of domestic treason if anybody else took the liberty of doing what she couldn't. So, bless her old soul, she sat as upright as she could in her great chair and looked as fierce as might be, and that was benevolent after all. "Mother," shouted Mr. Wardle, "Mr. Pickwick, you recollect him?" "Never mind," replied the old lady with great dignity. "Don't trouble Mr. Pickwick about an old creature like me. Nobody cares about me now, and it's very natural they shouldn't." Here the old lady tossed her head and smoothed down her lavender-colored silk dress with trembling hands. Come, Mom," said Mr. Pickwick. "I can't let you cut an old friend in this way. I've come down expressly to have a long talk with you. And we'll show these boys and girls how to dance a minuet before they're 8 and 40 hours older." The old lady was rapidly giving way, but she didn't like to do it all at once, so she only said, "I can't hear him." "Nonsense, Mother," said Wardle. Now, come, don't be cross. There's a good soul." But age has its little infirmities of temper, and she was not quite brought round yet. So she smoothed down the lavender-colored dress again, and turning to Mr. Pickwick said, "Mr. Pickwick, things was very different when I was a girl." "No doubt of that, Ma'am," said Mr. Pickwick, and whether the old lady was touched by Mr. Pickwick's affectionate good nature or whatever was the cause, she was fairly melted, and all the little ill humor evaporated. A happy party they were that night. The best sitting room at Manor Farm was a good, long, dark-paneled room with a high chimney-piece and a capacious chimney up which you could have driven one of the new patent cabs, wheels and all. At the upper end of the room, seated in a shady bower of holly and evergreens, were the two best fiddlers and the only harp in all Muggleton. In all sorts of recesses and on all kinds of brackets stood massive old silver candlesticks with 4 branches each. The carpet was up, the candles burned bright, the fire blazed and crackled on the hearth, and merry voices and light-hearted laughter rang through the room. If anything could have added to the interest of this agreeable scene, it would have been the remarkable fact of Mr. Pickwick's appearing without his gaiters, for the first time within the memory of his oldest friends. "You mean to dance?" said Wardle. "Of course I do," replied Mr. Pickwick. "Don't you see I'm dressed for the purpose?" Mr. Pickwick called attention to his speckled silk stockings and smartly tied pumps. "Oh, you in silk stockings!" exclaimed Mr. Tupman jocosely. "And why not, sir?" "Why not?" said Mr. Pickwick, turning warmly upon him. "Oh, of course there's no reason why you shouldn't wear them," responded Mr. Tupman. "I imagine not, sir. I imagine not," said Mr. Pickwick in a very peremptory tone. Mr. Tupman had contemplated a laugh, but he found it was a serious matter. So he looked grave and said they were a very pretty pattern. "I hope they are," said Mr. Pickwick, fixing his eyes upon his friend. "You see nothing extraordinary in the stockings, as stockings, I trust, sir?" "Certainly not. Certainly not," replied Mr. Tupman. He walked away, and Mr. Pickwick's countenance resumed its customary benign expression. "We're all ready, I believe," said Mr. Pickwick, who was stationed with the old lady at the top of the dance, and had already made 4 false starts in his excessive anxiety to commence. "Then begin at once," said Wardle. "Now!" Up struck the 2 fiddles and the 1 harp, and off went Mr. Pickwick into hands across, when there was a general clapping of hands and a cry of "Stop! Stop!" "What's the matter?" said Mr. Pickwick, who was only brought to by the fiddles and harp desisting, and could have been stopped by no other earthly power if the house had been on fire. "Where's Arabella Allen?" cried a dozen voices. "And Winkle," added Mr. Tupman. "Here we are," exclaimed that gentleman, emerging with his pretty companion from the corner. As he did so, it would have been hard to tell which was the redder in the face, he or a young lady with black eyes. "What an extraordinary thing it is, Winkle," said Mr. Pickwick rather pettishly, "that you couldn't have taken your place before." "Not at all extraordinary," said Mr. Winkle. "Well," said Mr. Pickwick, with a very expressive smile as his eyes rested on Arabella, "well, I don't know that it was extraordinary either, after all." However, there was no time to think more about the matter, for the fiddles and harp began in real earnest. Away went Mr. Pickwick, hands across, down the middle to the very end of the room, and halfway up the chimney, back again to the door, poussette everywhere, loud stamp on the ground, ready for the next couple, off again, all the figure over once more, another stamp to beat out the time, next couple, and the next again. Never was such going. From the center of the ceiling, old Wardle had suspended with his own hands a huge branch of mistletoe, and this same branch of mistletoe gave rise to a scene of general and most delightful struggling and confusion. Mr. Pickwick took the old lady by the hand, led her beneath the mystic branch, and saluted her in all courtesy and decorum. The old lady submitted to this piece of practical politeness with all the dignity which befitted so important and serious a solemnity. But the younger ladies, not being so thoroughly imbued with a superstitious veneration for the custom, or imagining that the value of a salute is very much enhanced if it cost a little trouble to obtain it, screamed and struggled and ran into corners and threatened and remonstrated and did everything but leave the room until some of the less adventurous gentlemen were on the point of desisting, when they all at once found it useless to resist any longer and submitted to be kissed with a good grace. Mr. Winkle kissed the young lady with the black eyes. Mr. Snodgrass kissed Emily. And Mr. Weller, not being particular about the form of being under the mistletoe, kissed Emma and the other female servants just as he caught them. As to the poor relations, they kissed everybody, not even excepting the plainer portions of the young lady visitors, who in their excessive confusion ran right under the mistletoe without knowing it. Wardle stood with his back to the fire, surveying the whole scene with the utmost satisfaction, and the fat boy took the opportunity of appropriating to his own use and summarily devouring a particularly fine mince pie that had been carefully put by. The screaming had subsided, and faces were in a glow, and curls in a tangle. And the aforementioned was standing under the mistletoe, looking with a very pleased countenance on all that was passing around him, when the young lady with the black eyes, after a little whispering with the other young ladies, made a sudden dart forward, and putting her arm round Mr. Pickwick's neck, saluted him affectionately on the left cheek. He knew what was the matter. He was surrounded by the whole body, and kissed by every one of them. It was a pleasant thing to see Mr. Pickwick in the center of the group, now pulled this way and then that, and first kissed on the chin, and then on the nose, and then on the spectacles, and to hear the raised on every side. When they were all tired, there was a great game at Snapdragon, and when fingers enough were burned with that and all the raisins were gone, the fire of blazing logs, to a substantial supper and a mighty bowl of wassail, something smaller than an ordinary wash-house copper, in which the hot apples were hissing and bubbling with a rich look and a jolly sound that were perfectly irresistible. Mr. Pickwick, looking around him, this is indeed comfort. Our invariable custom at Christmas time, replied Mr. Wardle. Winkle, my boy, break up the fire. Up flew the bright sparks in myriads as the logs were stirred. A deep red blaze sent forth a rich glow that penetrated into the farthest corner of the room and cast its cheerful tint on every face.
I hope you enjoyed A Pickwick Christmas starring Charles Laughton from a 1952 Decca LP. The record also had a version of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and maybe we'll treat you to that next year. In the meantime, have a Merry Christmas season and a happy and healthy New Year. I'm Paul Druzba.
Thanks, Paul. I know a lot of our listeners enjoy hearing nostalgic pieces like that, and if it weren't for folks like you that enjoy archiving that sort of material, who knows, we may never hear it again, but it certainly deserves a place on WEU's nostalgic and family-friendly Holiday Festival of Sound. We're going to continue on, and don't forget you can read all about the holiday revelry around our community in the pages of the Reading Eagle newspaper. Stay tuned.